Hi teachers, welcome to our final video in our Building Instructional Coherence series. We are now at the ISS, Identify Student Success, the last part of our core instructional model. When we talked about academic learning time, we said that we want to make sure our students are being successful. In fact, we want to make sure they experience success at a 75 to 95% success rate. When we are teaching our students in their zone of proximal development, they are more likely to be successful. And we know that success breeds success and failure breeds failure. So we want to keep our students in that range where they are still engaged, still learning. They're not making 100% every single time because that wouldn't be their ZPD. They're in that area where they're learning, they're growing, and they are being successful, so they're willing to keep engaging with the subject matter. In our core instructional model, ISS is our final piece. It wraps up every single lesson. And when we look at our learning template, here it is right there at the end. So what is ISS? What does it mean to identify student success? Well, this is the time when students can identify what they've learned. They explain the processes that they used to learn something. They discuss how they can use this new information. They identify a next step, what they want to know more about. And this is where they show evidence. They can model for you what it is that they have learned. They can turn in the thing that they've been working on. They can jot down an exit ticket that tells you what they got out of that lesson. What's the purpose? What's the point of doing an ISS? Well, there are a few things. So first, it's going to help determine the level of mastery for each student. And this is going to help us as teachers to use that data to inform tomorrow's instruction. If I get information from my students that tells me that they still have a lot of questions, a lot of common mistakes are being made, well, I'm not going to continue on with my lesson plan tomorrow as planned. Instead, I'm going to take the time to go back and correct those errors, to clear up any confusion that might be taking place. And that's something I find out during an ISS. So what does an ISS look like? Well, first, it's going to reflect the objective. We continue going back to that objective all throughout our lesson during TIP and during SAP, and we bring it up again during ISS. What I want you to know is that the ISS is short. It is not a whole nother assignment. It's just a really quick check of where your students are in their learning. It's independent. I really don't want my students doing an ISS with a partner unless I just really feel like they can't be successful independently. Otherwise, I really want to know what each individual student is identifying as they're learning. It's going to help me clear up any misconceptions. It's something that I can have in my hands. I can collect it from my students. And most importantly, that bottom bullet point there, this is not a grade. Something that they do during student active participation, yes, that perhaps may be something I can use for a grade. But an ISS, no. All this is for students to be able to tell themselves, this is what I learned in this lesson, and then for me as their teacher to be able to use that information as a formative assessment, something that I can then use to guide my instruction. As a reminder, ARK and ISS are my bookends. I started my lesson by identifying what do you already know about this subject. Then we used our gradual release of responsibility here in the middle. Then at the end of the lesson, now it's time to identify what did you learn. It's going to be a part of every single lesson right there at the end. So let's look at our thinking frame. What can I use on here that will help me plan for my end of my lesson when I identify student success? I'm going to give you a moment to read through these bullet points here on the screen. As you're glancing through these bullet points, I'm going to point a few things out to you. We want students reflecting on their own learning and determining their own progress, knowing what they need to do next in order to be successful. So let's look at it. What is an ISS? If you remember back to our video on ARK, when we start our lessons by activating and assessing relevant knowledge, I gave you some examples, and we're going to revisit those examples now as we talk about how we would wrap up those lessons. So in our science lesson, we started it by asking students to tell their partner what they had learned about the different parts of the cell the day before. And then we said, yeah, we're going to learn more about those cell parts' jobs today. So now in my ISS, I'm going to say, tell your partner about the jobs of the Golgi apparatus and the mitochondria. Remember the ... and the asterisk. Those are some partner conversations. I'm going to let my partners talk about what they remember the jobs of those different parts of the cell are. I'm going to have them wrap up their conversations. Okay, who would like to tell me, what did you and your partner just talk about? What are some of the jobs of these two parts of the cell? And then I'm going to have them have another conversation. This is a really important question that I'm going to ask. Why do we need to know about this? Why do we need to know about the parts of the cell? I want them to discuss that with a partner and then share that out with the whole group. When students can identify the purpose behind something that they need to learn, it's going to change the way they engage with my subject matter. So identifying why I need to know about the parts of the cell, it's going to help me remember this at a deeper level and engage with it at a deeper level tomorrow. Well, how about my math lesson? Okay, so what I want you to do to wrap up our lesson, create a problem. So you can model it on the ones that we've been working through today, and you're going to give it to a partner to solve. Students would create their problem, they would swap papers, solve their partner's problem, give each other some feedback. If they didn't do some things correctly, we're going to again use partnering so that everyone's accountable, everyone is involved. And then at the end, I'm going to ask them, okay, guys, why do we need to learn about this? Why is it important to learn how to solve problems like these? And I want to hear what they have to say. It's going to tell me a lot about what they think about the kinds of math we're doing. And then finally, in social studies, tell your partner something new you learned today about the negative consequences that westward expansion had on all of these tribes that already lived there before, quote unquote, manifest destiny was a thing. And I want to hear my students talking about that. I want to hear my students telling each other about how this idea of manifest destiny really didn't work out so well. People who had already lived there for thousands of years. All right, so glancing down through our list of questions that we have for ourselves on our thinking frame, there's one more piece I want to point out, and that is feedback. I'm going to need to use this information that my students are giving to me during my ISS to give them feedback. I can use this ISS time to give feedback. Well, what's the importance of feedback? You know, John Hattie had some really powerful and profound things to say about feedback. He talked about how feedback has been shown to be one of the most significant activities a teacher can engage in to improve student achievement. Teachers, oftentimes we are guilty of giving, pat compliments. Oh, good job, regardless of whether what the student had to say was even on track with what I asked. We'll ask a question, a student will give a random answer, and we'll say, that's close, even if the truth is the answer was not close at all. So we want to avoid that, because if a student heard that, even if their answer was way off and they're like, oh great, I'm close, they might tune out and not hear the actual solution to the problem or not hear the correct answer. So giving honest feedback to our students, this is what can really be a game changer for them. So if we ask us our question and a student gives an answer that's way off, what do we want to say? Because obviously we're not going to say like, oh no, that's a terrible answer. You're so, we're not going to insult our students. But we are going to be honest and say, I can see why you made that mistake, but meet me afterwards because we're going to talk about how to solve this correctly. Or boom, just in the moment say, okay, let me show you how to do this because I can tell by that answer that we've got some misconceptions. So we want to be honest with our students. We want to prove to our students that we are a trustworthy person who's not going to let them continue thinking about things in a wrong fashion. So how do we do it? Well, research says that if I have clear goals, they give me an initial target, but then feedback is going to give those students information on where they are progressing toward that target. So we watch our students learn, we give them some feedback, we adjust our instruction, and the cycle continues, of course, always linked to our lesson objectives. How do we provide effective feedback? I'm going to give you a moment to read what we have here on the screen, this quote. So when you think about learning anything new, anything at all, we like to have feedback. I want to know if I'm doing this right. I want to know if I'm doing a good job, whether that's in my profession as a teacher or whether I'm just learning how to crochet. I want some feedback. I want to learn how I can improve. Otherwise, I'm just going to create bad habits and they're going to be really, really hard to undo. So giving that feedback as you see your students moving through their lessons, this is going to be such a vital thing that we can do for our students. Setting them up for success by having a rubric so they can know what's to be expected. Let's say you're assigning a presentation that your students are going to give to the class. If they have a rubric before they even start working, they can see what's expected to get all of the different scores. And as they are progressing, you can use that rubric to give them feedback, to say, right now, what I'm seeing, you're at this level. So let's look at the things that are the next level up to see what you would have to do to get a higher score. So it's very direct. It's very clear what students need to do to continue to grow. So going back into our thinking frame, I have just a few more things I want to point out. And this is for us, teachers. We are going to use that information in identifying student success to reflect on our own practice. Because the truth is, if we find at the end of a lesson, oh my goodness, a lot of my students did not get it, well, that's on us. The truth is, our shoulders are the ones that are going to carry that burden. And if our students aren't understanding, I want to know that because then I need to go back in and correct. I need to teach more clearly. I need to explain in another way. Identifying student success gives us information about our own success as educators. And as we know, the most important factor affecting student achievement is us and how effective we are at our job. I hope this information about building instructional coherence by using the core instructional model has been helpful and that you can use it to become even more effective in your teaching practice. Thank you so much for your time.